Aren't you curious about your hotel and the mysteries here within?
We are talking The Haunted Hotel, a quintessentially English anthology movie, all based in one location. Now, this is a very low budget movie, and as such we have to kind of bear that in mind when we're reviewing it, because we're not going to be expecting flashy set pieces or elaborate special effects. Instead, it will have to rely on clever writing, good characters and performances. I will say this movie has a little bit of a trump card up its sleeve in the fact that it's a quite clever idea to have an anthology movie with 8 separate stories, but the common thread here is the same location. This particular hotel, which is a real hotel, or at least it was, in Ipswich in the UK, and it was actually apparently filmed in this location, in this genuine hotel that it actually takes place in. So that's quite fun and gives it a little bit of a unique flavour. Now, I would liken this kind of movie to, I would say, classic English ghost stories, I kind of said. Now, what do I mean by that? We've seen the period dramas. Imagine Downton Abbey with if it was a a haunted house story. Maybe it's akin a little bit like a Charles Dickens novel. Now, this actually has a little bit of a connection to Charles Dickens in the fact that Dickens actually referenced the hotel in one of his works, the same hotel where this is set in and filmed at. So it definitely has connections here to, I would say, classic literature. Now, with an anthology movie, it's hard to tell you about each of the... I don't want to spend too much time telling you about each of the stories, so I'm going to talk more generally here. The unique selling point, as I say, to this film is it takes place over different time periods in this same hotel. So the most recent story being 2019, and the earliest one set 100 or so years ago. So that's its unique selling point. So, but what do I think about it? So, because this is such a low budget movie, I have to say I was very impressed with the production value in regards to its technical makings of the film. The camera work, the lighting, the editing, I thought was all done with an assured and confident manner. And this has, a multitude of different directors, being 8 different stories. But I feel each of them shows that they are competent filmmakers with such a limited budget, and obviously then limited equipment and things like this. But nonetheless, you wouldn't know it to look at it. I feel this movie does have a professional sheen to it. At least, obviously, to the best this budget can really provide. I think it looks good, it's well produced for what it is, and it looks like it's made by professionals with professional equipment. I think especially is worth of that here some of the cinematography, the lighting used to lit these these corridors to make them seem somewhat ethereal and scary at the same sort of time. And for example, in our first story, which is I believe our earliest one, pretty much everywhere is lit by candle. There's no electricity here, and it really does feel like, you are trapped alone in the darkness, even though it's actually set in this one particular hotel. It's very, very eerie at times. And I want to have also a shout out to the music here, where I thought the music in the majority of films, and particularly the first one, is definitely on point and really adds to that that dread. It's worth noting, I would say, that even though I would class this as a horror film, this is really a very light horror film. It's not a particularly scary movie in any way. None of the stories really veer too much into true horror. Maybe with the exception of the very last movie, which is the nearest to a traditional horror film, I would say, with more VFX and shocking moments and maybe a little bit more scary. And there's one which involves a a writer going into a hotel, which I think is set in the 70s, I want to say, which is more of a psychological horror to a degree. The rest of them are more supernatural dramas, and one's even an out-and-out comedy, to be honest. So this is a very, very light horror movie. It's certainly one that you could watch, say, over Christmas if you wanted to watch a Christmas ghost story. So it's a family affair, so to speak. You could watch this one in front of younger audience and they'd be okay with it. But at the same time, this may not be for those of you who want something a little bit more bloody or hardcore, genuinely scary. It's a light horror film, so please bear that in mind. I also have to say, I think the acting is pretty much universally pretty good among all of these kind of 8 films. I don't think there was any clangers in regards to performances. There's a couple, I don't want to point out which one. There are a couple which I would say veer on parody. But a lot of these films, I would say, use what I would refer to as theatre acting. And what I mean by that is when you're in a theatre and you're performing to a live audience, you have to somewhat over-enunciate and over-perform, because obviously you have people who are watching you from further back in the crowd who may not see the nuances that you are trying to do. So you somewhat kind of overdo things to try and make sure your performance is seen by as many people. So I refer to that as theatre acting. I think it's kind of a term that maybe people would use. That's kind of what I would use to describe some of this acting. I got the impression that a lot of these actors come from more of a live performance background, and it kind of shows through the movie. So I wouldn't say it's that they have necessarily bad performances, but it comes across like that more so than film or TV acting, which tends to be a slightly different kind of beast. I feel the movie is quite clever. Some of the films are quite clever in regards to the twist, and some of them have a kind of a fun little conceit. There's a fun one which I think is set in 1929 when we have this amateur kind of ghost hunter with her, her old school kind of equipment, and that's kind of, it reminded me kind of like the House on Haunted Hill and stuff like that. So it has a couple of kind of fun little touches. All of the movies are approximately around the same kind of length, so we get, none of them feel like they're overstaying their welcome, and none of them are too short where they don't feel like they kind of make any kind of real impact. My favourite story, if I had to pick one, was the one where we have a writer that stays there who's had a kind of a mental breakdown, and he's trying to get away, get some peace, and he's taking a few drugs and stuff to try and settle his mind. But he's plagued by what appears to be the ghost of a black dog. And it's kind of driving him in maybe a positive way and a negative way. And that to me was one of the best movies, in my opinion, because I genuinely didn't know where it was going. I like the characters, I like the relationship he had with his agent, things like this, and how his agent was kind of friendly, but also, trying to usher him on for kind of selfish means. I thought that was quite good. And to me, that was my personal favourite movie. I think it was the most gripping, had the best kind of story, and had, I think the best overall arc for a character. If I had to transition to maybe what I didn't like, there's one story which is more of a comedy, which I think overstayed its welcome to a point where I think that it's kind of relying on the same joke over and over. That one to me was the one that worked the least. Some people may find it, the comedy's kind of like charming and witty and kind of very sort of like light. So don't be expecting belly laughs with this one necessarily, but it's kind of like, it's genuinely like a comedy that you would see in the kind of like years past, where it's very light, tittering and stuff like that. But to me, that one was kind of a little bit one note for me. If I had to have some other critiques in regards to the stories in general, there's one theme that I noticed through multiple movies, and this is where we have characters interacting with someone who they assume is human, but they are actually a ghost. Now that conceit is clever, but I think it does it like to at least 3, maybe even 4 stories, where we have a character that thinks the person they're talking to is real, but they're actually a ghost. Now, if that had only been in one story, great. But where it's in so many, the setup might be slightly different, but ultimately it's the same thing. It's the same thing where we have our protagonist in the movie has interactions with someone, and that someone ends up being a ghost that they don't even realise. And the problem is that's done over multiple films. So we feel like we're seeing the same conceit in different kind of shorts, even though the circumstances of why they're there might be different, but the actual contact, so to speak, is the same. It's obviously, as I said, it's a low-budget movie, so this is not particularly splashy in regards to kind of special effects and things like that. That's that's not necessarily a critique of the film, but I have to say it's worth noting for those who want to see a bit more of a visual spectacle. And I feel this movie's tone is maybe one for older folks. Your parents may like this movie. They're the sort of thing they would kind of watch on TV, unless you are very much a theatre kid. And I think that maybe for those two camps, I feel this movie is really kind of aimed at. I can imagine, for example, my mum would enjoy watching this kind of thing on TV. They'd enjoy all the kind of the period pieces, the period costumes and the decor and things like that. But I've got to say, it's done to a particularly good standard. Or I feel this theatre performance style kind of thing that it has going on, again, may appear to those of you who maybe like live theatre and stuff like that. So I feel this movie is pretty well made for the audience that I think that would specifically enjoy it. So that might sound a little bit of a cop-out, but I do feel that there's going to be certain people here that simply won't be interested. This movie is not for everyone. It's as simple as that. If you like your slasher films and that's your favourite genre, forget about it. Or even those of you who like stuff that's got genuinely scary stuff in. Again, I just don't think there'll be enough here. But the movie is charming and has a... like I said, I do enjoy this unique feature of having this kind of 8 separate stories that don't really have any connective tissue outside of this one location. It kind of makes me want to go to this hotel, I have to say. But I don't think it exists anymore. I think it's maybe have closed down. But there you go. So overall, I feel it's a kind of a fun movie for a certain audience. It could have been maybe a little bit more jazzy if it had a little bit more bit of effects. The only real critique I would say, I think the movies could have been curated better in regards to not having the same conceit in regards to the same plot point in multiple films. That to me should have been picked up by the producers of this overall package. I think, hang on a second, we've got multiple movies here that seem to have the same conceit. I maybe would have kind of like looked at that and wanted to kind of change up at the writing stage here, because that to me struck me as okay, we keep doing the same thing. But I've got to say, I still, for the budget, I was impressed with the production. I was impressed with the kind of the acting and the ideas, at least for the most part. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.